Some of today's stories do contain some disturbing subject matter, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a scary story you'd like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. About 15 years ago, I had something happen to me that has haunted me since the day that it happened, and I genuinely do not have an explanation for what exactly it was, or how things went the way that they did. This is the only time anything like this has ever happened to me, and for that I am thankful, mostly because the outcome was not a positive one. And with how everything compounded within a short period of time, I was honestly ready to give up. Obviously, I'm glad that I didn't, but I was ready to. Let me explain how it all went on that day. As I said, it was a decade and a half ago, so it would have been back in 2007. Back then, on Sundays, I used to get together with a few of my girlfriends so that we could get brunch at a local hangout spot that we really liked. It was decently priced, in a good part of town, and they had really good food for their brunch menu. When we went during the warmer months, we would always take one of the seats that was on the front patio, as it was always incredibly comfortable sitting outside and having our meal. It had pretty quickly become the main thing that I would look forward to every week, as the girls that I spent time with were my best friends from high school, and we would just talk and gossip about whatever was on our minds. On this particular day, we were there eating and just talking about our weeks. And then I noticed a man that was sitting on the ground in the nearby park, just propping himself up against one of the brick retaining walls. This is not a judgmental statement, but he did appear to be homeless. And by that I mean that he looked like he was a bit unkempt, his clothes were dirty and a bit ragged, and he just had that weathered look. You know the one. Like he had been through a lot and was just doing his best to get through it all. Again, there was zero judgment on my part. He just kind of fit the appearance of what I think of when I think of a homeless man. I will say that my area doesn't have a large homeless population, so he definitely stood out and caught my attention. After noticing him, I went back to the conversation with my friends and we were just kind of chatting. And then I looked back over at him and I noticed that he was looking straight at me. As soon as we met eyes, he lifted his hand and gave me a slight wave. At first, I wasn't sure if he was actually waving at me, but when that thought entered my mind, he nodded, as if he knew that I was thinking it, and he was telling me that he was, for certain, waving at me. I felt obligated to wave back, and as soon as I did, the man stood up from where he was resting across the street and started heading toward us. One of my friends asked if I knew him, and I mentioned that I didn't, and they were all kind of asking why he was coming over to us. And again, I said that I didn't know. I just kind of sat there in silence as he approached, kind of like I was in a trance. I didn't know this man, I had never seen him, nor met him, nor spoken to him, but I felt like I needed to hear whatever it was he was going to tell me. He crossed the road, walked over to where we were sitting, and he actually knelt down right by where I was seated. He reached over, grabbed my hand, and he said, "I am so sorry for what you're about to go through. Stay strong, and don't give up. Everything will be okay." Now, this in and of itself was actually terrifying. This man just walks up, kneels down, and gives me this cryptic and almost threatening message. But it was even more so when he just stood up without elaborating and walked away. He didn't go back to the park. He didn't stick around the restaurant. He didn't say anything else. He just walked down the sidewalk until we couldn't see him anymore. Obviously, my friends said that that was really weird, and they asked if I was okay. And I told them that I was fine and just kind of agreed that it was weird. And they kept talking about the whole thing, but after a while, I asked to change the subject because I was kind of starting to feel uncomfortable about it. Now, as I said, this was weird and kind of creepy, but what happened next was actually what makes this such a haunting situation. That week, the same week that this man told me that he was sorry for what I was going to go through, that was the week that I lost both of my parents. It was exactly 6 days later, on that following Saturday. They were out driving, just going out to do whatever it was they liked to do, and their car was struck by a drunk driver driving way too fast and swerving into the wrong lane. They were hit head-on at too high of a speed for anyone involved to live. They both lost their lives, and the driver of the other vehicle died as well. They were all three killed on impact. To say that dealing with losing both of your parents suddenly like this was hard is an understatement. It was devastating. It killed me inside, to be honest. I'm an only child, and I had to deal with all of their affairs and their estate and everything, and I was only 24. I had no idea what I was doing in my life, much less how to handle things after my parents had passed away. Dealing with their stuff afterwards wasn't the hard part, to be clear. It was the fact that I had to sit there and try to do paperwork, and schedule funerals, and talk to lawyers, and I was in that deep pit that grieving shoves you into. I couldn't really focus on anything, and I was holding back sobbing literally every moment that I was awake. Which was all of them because, let me tell you, my sleep schedule was non-existent. I wanted to end it all, because my parents were my rock. I needed them for guidance in my life, and they were just never going to be there ever again. On the day of their funeral, my extended family showed up, and everything was so bleak. I felt like I was just empty. I didn't know what I was going to do the next day, the next week, or if it was even worth continuing. As I was sitting there, mulling over the options, my uncle on my dad's side was up at the podium saying some final words, and he caught my attention when he said, "We have to make sure that we stay strong. Don't give up, and remember that everything will be okay." When he said this, the thought of that homeless man re-entered my mind. Obviously, I hadn't really thought about him with all that was going on, but at that moment, he was all I could think about. I remembered what he had said to me, and was again reminded of his words, considering my uncle had said them almost verbatim. I got through the hard parts by just reminding myself that things would be okay eventually. That it was okay to feel pain. That it was okay to have these feelings during this time. So long as I stayed strong and kept going. And for the sake of my parents, I did keep going. I did stay strong, and eventually things did get less painful. I won't say that it ever hits the point where things are fine. Losing them is still devastating to this day, but I'm able to live my life for me and for them. And I'm able to keep a smile on my face and actually mean it most of the time. That all said, that day 15 years ago, when that man grabbed my hand and said that he was sorry for what I was about to go through, what was that? Was he clairvoyant, and he was able to see it coming? Was there some sort of otherworldly connection that he and I shared, and he was able to tell what was actually about to happen? Or was this honestly just a really weird coincidence? In the end, I obviously never saw him again. I tried to find him. But if I ever do, I will thank him for the heads up. And I'll thank him for the encouraging message that he gave me because, as haunting as it's been, it's also because of his words that I realized I needed to keep going. If he was able to see the bad that was going to happen, then I have to assume that he was also able to see the good. and encouraging me to continue was his way of saying that he knew things would be okay. I have a really weird story from way back when I was a very young lad. I think at the time I would have been around 12, maybe 13 at the very oldest. Back then, I lived in my parents' old house, which was pretty much in the middle of nowhere in the northern Midwest. I don't want to give the exact location because I really don't know what this whole thing was about, and if it was more serious than I think, I don't want to, I guess, anger someone or a group of people. I know that sounds stupid, but to me it makes sense, especially with what I saw and how it ended up. Back then, I used to spend a lot of time hiking in the woods behind my neighborhood. There weren't any other kids in my area, and my only sibling was my older sister, so my childhood was honestly pretty boring and void of friendship. I made the best of it though, and I used to make up a lot of fun games with myself. Not that I remember what I used to actually do, just used to play some dumb games until I had to go home for dinner. This event actually took place in those woods. It was sometime in the middle of summer because I was out of school and was home alone for most of the day, because my sister was always over at her girlfriend's house, so I just pretty much did whatever I wanted to do. On this day, I was doing as I always did and went out into the woods to see what I could get up to. I was out playing, doing a whole lot of nothing, when I noticed something out a bit in the forest. It kind of looked like a person. Like it was a person standing in the woods and they were of an adult's height and stature, but they were just standing there completely and totally still. I was a bit nervous at first. I hadn't seen anyone in these woods in the years that I have lived there, and most of the people didn't spend any time back there. It was really strange to see this person just standing in the woods, and even weirder that they were wearing all black from top to bottom. It looked like they were wearing a ski mask too, since the back of their head was covered in some kind of black cloth as well. Again, this was the middle of summer. It was kind of hot outside, so the fact that they were wearing all black and what appeared to be a ski mask was even weirder. I started kind of creeping around to see what exactly this person was looking at, because like I mentioned, he was just standing there, completely stone still. At first, I was kind of sneaking around, but again, he wasn't paying any attention to me, so after a bit, I just stopped sneaking, and I just kind of started walking around him from a safe distance. Honestly, I wasn't 100% sure that he was actually a person and not a mannequin that was placed there, because he didn't react to me walking around into what would have been his line of sight. As I got around to the front, I noticed two things that made this whole thing even weirder. First off, he wasn't staring at anything. There was nothing in front of him. He was just standing there and looking down at the ground. Secondly, he was wearing a plain white mask with no details. It was a mask that was shaped like a person's face, but it was just plain white with no other details. So, to reiterate, this person was standing completely still, wearing all black, including some kind of head covering, and was wearing a detailless white mask, and he was staring at literally nothing. After just standing there for a few moments, I decided that this was actually terrifying, and I took off to go back home. Again, I kept my distance, but he continued to not pay attention nor acknowledge that I was anywhere nearby. There was a point where I did get close enough to see that this man was breathing, and that this was a person, not a mannequin. I went home and I wasn't really sure what I should do, or if I should actually do anything. Because he wasn't hurting anybody, or doing anything illegal or anything like that. I did tell my mom when she got home that there was a weird man in the woods, and she told me that it was public and that there wasn't anything wrong with that. I kind of just accepted that response and moved on. Now, it doesn't quite end there. There is actually a little bit more to this story. A couple of days after that happened, I had actually gone back out into the woods because I wanted to see if the man was still there. I have no idea why I thought he would still be there, or again, as it was a few days later. I guess I just thought that if he was there again, then whatever he was doing was certainly sketchy, and I could possibly get my parents out there to see what was happening. Of course, he wasn't there, but when I went out to where he was standing, I did find something that I did not expect. Right there where the man was standing was a small wooden cross stabbed into the ground, and the white mask was nailed to where the two parts of the wood crossed over. There was nothing written on the cross. There was nothing else there, just the cross with the mask. Back then, it was just weird to me, and I had no idea what to think. But now, part of me thinks that it may have had something to do with a cult or something, because it was just odd behavior, and the whole cross thing was just bizarre. And that's actually why I didn't want to mention the location, because if it was a cult thing, I don't want them coming to find me, because I still live in the town. And before anyone asks, no, I never went back to that area of the woods. No, I've never told anyone else about the cross, and I have no idea if it's still there. So, to me, this was the scariest thing that I've ever experienced, and I hope that I never experience anything like it again. I'll hit the highlights to try to keep this shortish, but it took place over the course of 35 years, so be warned. It started when my college roommate clipped a runner from one of the philodendrons in the student union, and then stuck it in an empty jar with some water back in our dorm room. A few days later, she delightedly showed me the tiny rootlets sprouting from a joint and said, "Look, my baby's teething," and that's how baby got its name. The first incident happened the next semester, and I didn't link it to baby until much later. I had a paper due and had to type it up. And this was before the time of PCs, and I kept my electric typewriter in a narrow space between the head of my bed and the cinder block wall. But it wasn't there. I looked around at all the places that it could conceivably have been. Under the desk, on the desk, in the closet. Nope. There just weren't that many places that it could have been hiding in that tiny dorm room. I kept coming back to the space between the bed and the wall, because that's where it should have been, and I couldn't understand why it wasn't there. I even went out to my car thinking that I might have taken it home with me over the weekend, though I knew that I hadn't. Nope. I went back to the room, again, looked where it was supposed to be, still an empty space with no typewriter or case. I sat down on my bed, racking my brain for where it might possibly be. I had looked everywhere. I got up and again looked where it was supposed to be, and it was there. My roommate had been sitting at the other side of the desk the whole time, working on her own assignment, watching my frantic search. When I pulled it out, her jaw dropped. And no, there was no way she could have had anything to do with its disappearance, nor reappearance. I didn't have time to puzzle it over. I had an assignment to get done, in time to get some sleep. A couple of years later, my roommate changed universities, and I inherited baby. The first incident I directly associated with baby happened while I was living in a haunted dorm room. So again, I didn't associate cause and effect with baby until later. My suite mate, had a helium balloon that went missing from her room. Somehow, it got through 2 locked doors and into my room, where it was wedged between Baby's hanging pot and the window. We joked that Baby liked balloons and let him keep it. Things disappearing and reappearing, sometimes in unlikely or too obvious places, it became a fact of life. Apparently, Baby had a shoe fetish because often it would be a single shoe that disappeared. But it could be anything. The most inconvenient of which were my keys or my driver's license. Usually, I would shrug and wait for it to reappear because it always did. If it was something I needed in short order, or the disappearance became a hassle, I would buy Baby a balloon. The needed item would then reappear and things would calm down for a while. Time passed. Years. Decades. Space ensued. Different dorm rooms and apartments. Different cities. Different states. I went through a variety of roommates and friend groups as well, and anyone who spent any significant time in my home came to know Baby's kleptomaniac ways, and just accept it as a running joke. Until a few years later when, during a series of moves in rapid succession and a great deal of stress, I neglected Baby, and it died. Despite my belated efforts, I could not revive it. You would think that this would be the end, but no. When things get misplaced, I have to find them myself. I can't just offer Baby a propitiatory balloon and have the item reappear someplace obvious. And I find myself missing Baby. Every time I see a philodendron, if it's the right shade, leaf size, and shape, and a variegated variety, I'm tempted to get a cutting. But would it be the same? Last summer, on my way to visit my folks, I drove through the town where I attended college. I drove around the university, and I'll do it again next summer. I'm sure that in 35 years, the student union has been redecorated and the plants are probably long gone. But I'm equally sure that any philodendron on campus that looks like Baby is from the same cultivar lineage. Next summer, I will find one, and I will get a cutting. To answer any anticipated questions, no recreational pharmaceuticals were involved. Most of my friends didn't even drink. We found college to be a liminal experience on its own, without any mood-altering substances involved. No, this is not fiction. Every part of it is true. And yes, I have submitted the story of the haunted dorm room. I'm not exactly sure which topic the situation would be acceptable for, but I'm going to say it's leaning more towards creepy stories or paranormal encounters. Also, extreme trigger warning. This is very disturbing. Please make sure that you're in the correct headspace to read this true, but extremely disturbing situation that is very much affecting my entire life. A little over a year ago, I found a video in my TikTok drafts. That in itself is weird, because I always keep my draft folder cleared out. Anyway, I noticed a video and of course was curious about what it was, so I opened it. The video was of myself. However, I was staring into the camera and not saying anything. My eyes looked different, and they began to turn a solid black color as a strange grin crossed my face. The expression on my face was as if I was someone or something that had never seen myself in a reflection or on camera. The facial expressions were not mine. I immediately got chills all over and my heart started to race. Who or what was this? I've never sleepwalked, so I'm sure that it wasn't that. I was awake in the video and coherent, but the face was not mine, and I have absolutely no recollection of recording this weird footage of myself just glaring into the camera. It was also dark, and there was absolutely no sound. I didn't speak. I didn't explain what the video was. It was just me glaring into the camera with a wicked-looking face and black eyes. I still have the video and I've shared it on my social media, hoping to find answers from the paranormal community. One person claims I could be what is called a changeling. I didn't know what a changeling was, so I researched it. I got a sick feeling in my stomach as I learned what a changeling is. It's basically when your soul is stolen and your body is taken over by something paranormal as a child. Without writing an entire book about changelings, I'll leave it up to the listeners to look it up. There have been other incidents with me that also lead me to believe that this could be what is going on. My fiancé said that one time I was asleep in the middle of the night, and he was laying next to me reading. He said that I suddenly sat straight up in the bed, and I turned my head almost robotically straight at him, and just glared at him. He said that it creeped him out so much that he left the room. He said that it didn't look like me, and that it seemed like my body had been taken over by something dark. This has been one of the many incidents over the last year since I found that video footage. How long has this been going on? Could I be doing stuff at night and not even know about it? It's another level of creepy knowing that something is taking over my body while I sleep. The worst part is, no one can help me. And when I tell people about it, they instantly become afraid of me and I get ghosted a lot. Can anyone tell me what is happening to me? Please, if you can, I beg you, leave your advice in the comments. I wonder if this has anything to do with all the glitches that I have experienced as well. Either way, I did not make that footage. And whatever did is still around, using my body to do whatever it wants while I sleep. I have a strange story that occurred back when I was in middle school that I genuinely cannot explain. Back then, I didn't have many friends, but the friends that I did have were pretty close. We were a bit of a clique, but when you don't have many people to talk to or do things with, that sort of thing does happen. My group of friends included 3 other guys. We'll just call them J, T, and P. The 4 of us were super close all throughout elementary school, and we were more like a small band of brothers than just casual friends. This continued up to middle school as well. We had several classes together, so it worked out pretty well for us. In the second quarter of the second year of middle school, which would have made it the 8th grade, I think, we ended up adding a 5th person to our little group of friends, a boy named Mark. I'm using Mark's name because he's probably the most important person in this story, as the event is about him specifically, and for other reasons that may make sense later. Mark had apparently gone to the same elementary school as us, though he wasn't in the same class as the 4 of us, and we had never met him. I remember when I asked him about it, he had mentioned that he was in my class in 4th and 6th grade, but I couldn't remember him being in the classroom. He knew the teachers' names, and he knew other kids in the classes, which told me that he probably wasn't lying. I felt bad, but I just couldn't recall him being there. Now, the reason that we added Mark to our friend group is kind of strange. He just sort of showed up one day during the morning and at lunch, like he had always been there. He acted like he had always been part of our group. He was talking to us, laughing about things that only we would have found funny. It was seriously as if he was one of us from day one. But he just kind of showed up and sat with us one day. I know that may not sound too weird to some people. Maybe he was just really charismatic. But it was weird. And it got weirder. Not because he was there, but because of what happened after that second quarter. In between second and third quarter is winter break, which is basically that week and a half or so when we don't have class because of Christmas and New Year's. During this time, I had to spend the entire week at my grandparents' house at my parents' request, so I didn't get to spend any time with my group of friends. I was bummed out about it, and JT&P promised that they wouldn't do anything too stupid without me, as I was always the one getting into trouble. I spent my time there, and then when it came time to go back to school, I noticed that Mark wasn't there on the first day back. I didn't think too much of it. People get sick when they have all their holiday get-togethers. Maybe he was just sick and going to be back the next day. Now, mind you, at this point, I didn't really mind Mark, but I didn't really feel like he was one of the boys, if that makes sense. I had an issue with him just kind of showing up thinking that we had to accept him as one of us, but I didn't dislike him. He was an okay kid, and he was a pretty funny guy as well. Then, the next day, I noticed that there was still no Mark. I ended up asking Jay if he had heard from him, and he asked me who I was talking about. T&P both said the same thing. They didn't know anybody named Mark. I thought they were just messing with me at first, just trying to pull one over on me, and then when Mark came back, they would pretend like I was crazy, and that they never said anything about not knowing him. That was until I asked our math teacher, the only class that I had with Mark. I asked her if Mark was just out sick, or if he was okay. She had no idea who I was talking about. I described Mark, said his last name to her, told her he was the funny kid with the short dark hair and glasses that usually sat next to me, and she seriously looked at me like I was insane. She said that the person that sat next to me was a girl in class named Deborah, and that she would be back in class the next day, but there was never anyone named Mark who had sat next to me, and no one by that name in that class at all. This set me on a really weird and confused path. I actually went back to try to find Mark in any of my elementary school yearbooks, checked my 7th grade yearbook as well, and I couldn't find him at all. I checked my 4th and 6th grade books, and there was never anyone named Mark, last name starting with a G, in either one of those classes, or the other classes for those years. In fact, there were no Marks at all, nor any students with last names starting with G's in the entire year. It was like he was just wiped from the face of the earth entirely, and I was the only one to remember him. It was really strange that this kid that showed up one day like he knew who we all were and had always been our friend disappeared as quickly as he had integrated into our group. I really didn't know what to make of this, and I still don't. Like I said, I didn't mind the guy. He wasn't my best friend or anything, but to get to know someone over a couple of months, spend mornings and lunch with him, and have math class with him, only to have him simply disappear without a trace, it made me feel like I was crazy. I know that this was not a hallucination, as my other friends interacted with him, and it was seriously a couple of months. There's no way that I hallucinated a friend for that long. In the end, I just had to accept that this person did not exist and move on. Something I hated doing, but it didn't matter how much I talked about him because no one else knew who he was. I hope that nothing bad happens to him, and I hope that if he was from another timeline or something, that he and I stayed friends. Unfortunately, in this reality, he just simply never... that, my friends, was a collection of 5 true scary unexplained stories. Stories where there really isn't an answer as to what exactly happened, or what exactly caused them, what exactly is going on, etc., etc. Definitely some weird stuff. I mean, from a thieving philodendron to the person stating that something was taking them over there as they're sleeping, the man in the mask, the kid not existing, the homeless man that was psychic. These are really intriguing and genuinely terrifying stories to me. So hopefully you all enjoyed them, because I love doing this subject specifically. Ones where there's just no answer. It kind of feels close to my glitch stories, because there's no real answer for most of those, but I think that these are more scary. So hopefully, again, as I said, you enjoyed them. If you did, please consider hitting that thumbs up button, as it helps greatly and tells me that you liked it and maybe you want more like this. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, as I do stories 3 times a week at minimum. And yeah, a lot of good stuff coming up for sure, trust me. And if you feel so bold, please consider leaving a comment down below, letting me know how you're doing, what you thought of the stories, which one was your favorite. If you've ever had anything unexplained happen to you in short form, if you want to post it down there, go ahead. And yeah, there are other things you can do to support the channel, such as using the super thanks button. You can go to Patreon or join the memberships down below, where you get early access to content like this, as long as it goes up early. Typically does, not always. Sometimes I'm on time, unfortunately, but I try to get in as early as possible, up to 24 hours. Had actually quite a few patrons join recently, so that's pretty cool. Thank you to all you guys who join. Really do appreciate it. It really does support the channel, like, way more than you know, because the money that comes from that goes to pretty much back in the channel to make things better and keep things going. Specifically the electric bill. Anyways, yeah, anyways. Friends, I hope you're having a beautiful day. I hope I do see you on the next one, but until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you're the best you that you can be, and never let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, much love, and sleep well.